So I know in the last one, I had tried to do me walking around and what all, but it didn't quite work out with the sound and the way it came out. So I'm gonna stick to this for a little bit longer until I can figure that out. But so I know coronavirus is back in everyone's minds again, and I know there are some places that have even only recently just started to like do the whole mask required thing after opening back up. And there have been a bunch of other things too. But kind of wanted to like add some comment to things that I've noticed and things like that over the last little bit. Kind of more localized to the state of Utah. If you would have looked at earlier on, I was kind of looking at what Governor Herbert, his response was to the whole situation, and it's like, okay, that's cool, whatever. He's kind of left it up to the people to kind of do more of what they feel, and kind of still giving people the leeway to decide how they want to respond to it. But many businesses still shut down. Many local areas and cities decided that they would do like a lockdown too. But I kind of praised that response to it, like, we're not going to tell you to do anything or this, that, and the other, and we're not going to force you to. So there were many businesses that still kind of left it open to like, you don't have to wear a mask, when like they started recommending masks, and they still to some extent don't force people to wear masks, even though they have like mask required on the outside of their business. And I think many of the businesses that I've walked up to a couple weeks ago that said you need to wear a mask have kind of like thrown that out the window because they started losing sales due to it. But that was kind of with the more recent one, where he's kind of pushed for like a 55-day push or whatever to flatten everything and tell everyone to wear masks and everything else. It's kind of like, no. Really? Because when I know a while ago when everybody started freaking out, Sweden really didn't respond with any lockdowns or anything. And people are like, well, Sweden's this, that, or the other. And when you see footage of Sweden during the day, it's like they're living a normal life in spite of all this. And you compare their numbers to, or like take Stockholm, I believe it was, which is comparable to, I believe, London or some of these other places that had like full-on lockdowns. And they're actually doing slightly better in some aspects than those other areas. I think when comparing the death rate, or number of deaths, I believe it was better off slightly. But they don't have any of that, so that's kind of one of those. Sweden is kind of like that control that we have that kind of gives us an idea of what it could look like, and they really haven't fared all that badly. And then I look at how everyone has freaked out over on our end of the world, and it's like, why? I mean, I've been looking and trying to stay informed about everything and what's going on early on, and it's like, okay, and when I look at it more and more, when I look at the local numbers for my area, then it really boggles my mind, like, what's going on, because I'll see like these high number, because the way the health department here has it set up for the numbers is it'll show you a graph of negatives and a graph of positives results, both separately, but the graphs are kind of next to each other. So you can see where the negatives kind of spike for a few days, and the positives don't really have those spikes at all. it's still kind of like stayed pretty even in spite of all that. So yeah, we get more testing, but the cases themselves don't rise. Landon, come here, you. Okay. But then I also look, they report by county, because the health department covers 3 different counties, the number of cases and the number of recovered, the number of hospitalized, and the number of deaths. And so when I look at the number of cases, like new cases or whatever, then it's like, okay. And then I'll look at the recovered, and it's like at least normally around 2/3 of the number of cases have recovered for my county. But then I look at the hospitalizations. There was one day where it was up to like, I think 10 or 12, but then it dropped back to 0. Most of the time it's been at 0 for the hospitalizations. And then the deaths in my county, have basically been only 2 over the whole time period. And it's interesting. Sometimes I'll go look at the map that the state has for like the different area breakups and kind of look at the numbers that way too, because I can see like, okay, they have the per capita number for like the population. Landon, come here, you. So they've got the per capita number along with the total number that they've had for cases, and you can kind of see the per capita density. And when I look in like the wider open areas, yes, it looks like darker and higher per capita, but at the same time, those people are more spread out in that larger area. So I mean, they may be catching. One big thing that I see with these graphs is like there was this one day when there was a big freak out because they had tried to shut down a meat plant that they randomly, for some other reason, decided to test the whole staff and got like 400 new cases out of in a single night, and the meat plant has refused to shut down. But kind of like how Sweden has refused to shut down, and China is still kind of refusing to shut down due to anything new, really, because people have got to work. Who's going to pay their bills if they don't work? But it's kind of that deal where if you're paying attention, at least even like checking it once a week to see what it looks like, I don't see a reason why you should be freaking out. They've changed the metric that they were using in the news media from the number of deaths to the number of cases. It's turning it into a fear-mongering campaign. Okay? So, I mean, I see a lot of people out there, it's like, well, I don't believe the news media, but then by their actions they show that they do. So it's like, who are you going to believe? And then when the news media comes out with an article later on saying that, oh, well, New York or North Carolina, whatever, may have to revise their death numbers down by 25% because it might be slightly inflated. It's like 25% margin of error is quite a number to drop by for it to just be an accident. Okay? That kind of a margin of error means something fishy was going on. And some hospitals were getting money that they were fudging numbers for. Okay? The other thing that, I don't know, Sweden is kind of like our control standard for what it would look like. And I don't think Sweden's really had that much of a problem. But then you've got the behavioral change. Some people have noticed it's like, it looks so weird when I look at videos of pre-Rona times and they're not wearing masks. I almost freak out. It's like people have been socially conditioned to like see a mask on a person's face. And I don't know how many may, the whole nod thing to say hi. There's a facial expression that goes along with it, and wearing a mask, you lose half of that facial expression. Because you can almost tell in like the whole appearance of the face and all, and by their body language, that it's like, oh, he's saying hi and nodding to me. It's not just a twitch. And it's like, huh. And it kind of like removes some level of that interaction that we normally have because we've covered ourselves up. But yeah, it's kind of been interesting because I know I've heard a number of people talk about like they're moving into more rural areas because it's more open, and it's really nice because I can sit here and walk around and not wear a mask, and I can go and pick maters and without worrying about a mask so much. But you get all these people that freak out, and it's kind of interesting because you can kind of tell where it is. You'll get like some of the cities up near me where like less people are freaking out over like someone not wearing a mask. But you go to somewhere like Salt Lake and people look at you weird and odd and avoid you when you're not wearing a mask or anything, and it's like, gosh, if you don't have some sort of face covering, you're basically dog meat. So, but there have also been a number of Salt Lake people going up camping, and makes me think that maybe some of them are going for a longer vacation because they don't have to worry about it. So another thing that I've heard people complain about is our illustrious leader president's response to the whole pandemic and everything else too. And they're like, he should have done more, he should have done this, that, and the other. And it's like, some of these things that you're suggesting basically go outside of his jurisdiction that is written into law, that he basically stays out of like responding to certain things, like telling states to lock down or telling the states to send in or sending in certain federal law enforcement, because that oversteps the bounds that he has within law. But they're saying he should be doing this, that, and the other, and responding like that. It's like, no, that's the jurisdiction of the states to decide whether they want to do a lockdown or let the cities decide to do a lockdown or whatever. It's not up to the president. President's there to make sure that can take care of the travel thing, like the China travel ban early on that everybody bad-mouthed and now have retracted by their later words and actions. But a lot of people aren't aware of like the certain bounds that different offices and different levels of government are supposed to abide by. And they complain that like, oh, well, he's not accountable to the people. It's like, well, you're not really doing so well at keeping your local area accountable. Because you look at some of these areas where they're complaining about that, and they have voted a certain way, and they haven't held their talk about these problems where they're at, but they haven't held their local leaders accountable to that standard. So, it was a little bit ago I finished a book, 1913 by Oliver DeMille. He talked about the basis of government a little bit in it, and how our government was founded from the people. The people are represented 4 different times in the Constitution and the layout of it, whereas the elites are represented only once in the Senate. But we've since changed that so that the Senate also represents the people. And now the elites get to do whatever they want behind closed doors. The value that the Senate had is the elite, the quote elite class, would be out in the open for the people to see, but would also balance out some of the spending that the people would want, but now that balance isn't there. But what he talks about is the founding of government isn't from a top-down perspective, but it was from a bottom-up. Because the initial level of government that you have is basically a group government or a tribal government. You can argue familial, but that's kind of almost naturally set, that level of governance where the mother and father both govern as equals. But you get the tribal where the people come together and they decide how they're going to do things amongst each other. Then it builds up into like the city, and the city is accountable to the people by a council of the adults or however, and then goes up to on building up that way. And we've kind of since forgotten about that, and we look at it from a top-down perspective. So like another example that he brings up is there was later on an amendment that basically was the federal income tax. So the way it was before the federal income tax is the states wouldn't petition the federal government for funding, but the federal government would petition the states for funding, and the states would decide how much they would give to the federal government upon like certain agreement criteria or whatever. And so the federal government was at the behest of the states rather than the other way around. So what you had was the states trying to do the best that they could for their people. And so the states would tax the people, and then if the people were unhappy in that state with the tax that they had, the state could decide to lower the tax, and the federal government would just have to deal with whatever they got for the year. But now we've flipped that around, and the states get federal funding in order to do many of the functions that they perform. And so he cites that as the foundation of freedom. So we've kind of centralized it, and people argue that the government is corrupt and this, that, and the other, and they hate Trump now and say that he's trying to be fascist, but yet he's like trying to do the right thing by letting the states govern what they do. Whereas you look at some of what the Obama administration did, you look at the military administration, Obama micromanaged everything in the Middle East. So Trump comes first into office, and he gets a phone call from the Middle East like, hey, what do you want us to do about this thing? And it's like, I don't know, you know better what to do than I do, you figure it out. So what that kind of hints at is that Obama had set a standard over his 2 terms where basically you call up the president, get an order, and then go from there. And you see, so he had a centralization of power, and Trump's turning that around to like, okay, you guys know what to do. You know what's best for your local area. Why do I have to tell you what to do? And people are arguing for that power to be stuck in there, but yet they don't like Trump, and they say that he's trying to take control of everything. So they kind of have this cognitive dissonance where it's like, we hate the fact we want government to control a lot of things, but we don't like that that guy's in government, and we don't want him to control everything. So they're trying to have 2 sides of 2 opposites at the same time, and it just doesn't work out. And they expect that later on down the road, well, if this happens, then it'll be fine. So, for example, if you term hate speech is not free speech, and you've got the people you want in there controlling that, then you're going to be fine for a little bit. But what happens if someone that you don't like comes in with those hate speech laws? All of a sudden they can change that term around on you and arrest you because of a law that you wanted put in place, first of all, that was very subjective rather than objective and equalizing. So it's kind of that concept where it's like you've got to decide what you do and not just spew out like orange man bad to everyone. You've got to be able to decide the principles that you're going to sit on, and you've got to be able to pull apart, like, how will this affect this other area? So if I want federal government to be the central power, how's that going to affect it later on down the road if someone I don't like gets into that hot seat? Then that may change your mind on, like, the way you want government administration done. And it may actually make you figure out help you figure out how to get more active in your local area. So I think this has been a long one. Yeah, it's been really long. So get active, think really hard, use your brain cells, at least the one of them that you have.